it's the flip side of 2020 and 21 when people were buying deals above replacement cost, which anytime that happens, I think everyone needs to be a little bit fearful, because that means that pricing probably has become too exuberant.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. If you are enjoying the show, getting some great value from our guests, let us hear about it. Leave us that honest feedback. We'd love to see your rating and review. It helps us and it helps other listeners find this show. And listen, if you haven't done so for whatever strange reason, make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, today we're going to have a great show. We're going to be talking to Dan French. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the Mastermind button today. Dan French is the managing director of ATX Acquisitions and has helped orchestrate deals totaling over $2 billion in assets under management. On top of that, he also is the CEO of ResProp, a real estate private equity and property management firm where he has overseen the operation of a staggering 15,000 plus apartment units. Let's welcome to the show, Dan French.
I appreciate that, John, and I'm really excited to be here, man. I'm a fan of the podcast, so
Thank you,
it's a
man.
pleasure.
Thank you. I'm
Yep.
excited to talk to you, Dan. I went over your bio and kind of what you're doing right now at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of the background?
Yeah, how I got started in real estate was 20 years ago, and I was working class background. My family was I was born in the Bronx, New York, and I was raised upstate from the time I was 7, so still in the New York City metro area. By the time I got out of undergrad, I was approached by my still business partner. I'm still with him today after 20 years of real estate investments and building businesses together. His name is Pete Rex. Wonderful partner. I'm very blessed. But so really, he approached me right after I got out of undergrad and said, "Hey, he had a vision to go into real estate investments." And me coming out of undergrad, I was like, "Wow, just coming living in an apartment in like a college area. I'm like, man, one day I could do this. I felt the service, the experience was really terrible. I could be a better, landlord. I was thinking I didn't really understand real estate at this point, but I knew something was there, and I wanted to build future wealth for my family. I wanted to have a big family someday. So that was what was in my heart. That's why I said yes to investing alongside Pete in a small partnership. So it was Pete, his brother Rob, and myself. We formed a small partnership. We started buying, 4-unit buildings, and we bought a bunch of them. So this is in like my, 24 years old is when I basically started. And that's really the genesis of it all. I was chasing a career in public service, so I became an elected official in my hometown. I did that for 7 years, and concurrently I was doing real estate investments. I thought it'd be very passive, but we got hit by the great financial crisis. So I started in, like, let's say, 04, 05, right? And by 08, obviously the meltdown is occurring, and we're like the poster children for things that we did things, really backwards. And so we learned from all that, but that was a genesis, and that's how I began my career in real estate investment. So maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, man. Real quick, I love the background, right? You talked about just growing up working class, upstate New York. Really 20 years ago, you were approached by your business partner, good friend of yours. You ended up starting with these 4-unit properties and
Yeah.
scaled it from there. You thought that you would be a passive investor. You ended up pursuing this career in politics, became an elected official, and ultimately that kind of changed a little bit once the last economic downturn took place. But I love the fact that you kind of just took action. And it sounded like, if I'm reading you correctly, you were really hesitant at first. It was more so you just trusted your friend. You knew you had this vision of what you wanted to do. You knew real estate could help, but you were really mostly just trusting them to kind of figure things out and help you out along the way, as opposed to
Yeah.
say, hey, I want to be this active investor and build this huge portfolio. Is that right?
That's right. When you come from like working middle class values, sometimes, you kind of get taught, be careful of debt, be careful of taking risks, be careful of putting yourself out there. It's like the mentality sometimes becomes like, work your 30-year job, get your pension set up for your retirement and live a good life. And that's wonderful. I'm not taking anything away from those folks. I understand that mentality very well. And you could do wonderful things, be frugal and save for retirement and serve your family. And but if you want to be entrepreneurial and take risks, you have to break out of that mindset and start getting comfortable with that. So, that's where my head was at first. Like I had a vision that we could do something big, but it is scary for people to go and do that, to leave a more certain life and to take some more risk than they're used to, or haven't seen their family do that, anyone in their family do it, like break out and be the entrepreneurial, uh, the entrepreneur, get that mindset going. Do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I mentioned in your bio, and I was reading it, that obviously you've been involved in over $2 billion worth of acquisitions and managing over 15,000 units. So you clearly been able to build a really large portfolio and helping a lot of other clients in the process. You talked about growing up with those kind of middle class values, right? And understanding about hard work, work 30, 35 years, retire from a job. I come from the Midwest. My father is exactly the guy you're describing, right? I mean, blue
Mhm.
collar through and through. He had two jobs in his entire life, and he never would have applied for the second one if it was up to him. He got pushed into applying for the second job, but that was his mindset. And I recall when I was working, at GM in Detroit during that last economic downturn, my wheels started to turn and say, okay, I need to take more control over my future. And
Yeah.
real estate became a great vehicle to help me do that. For you at that time, you talked about the mentality and the mindset and kind of shifting. What do you equate that to? I mean, what did you do to shift that mindset to go from, okay, I'm going to invest in this stuff public, or, as an LP, be kind of a quiet, silent investor, to, and I'm going to focus on my political career here, being an elected official, to, you know what? I'm going to really focus on building a larger portfolio. I'm going to have an abundance mentality, and I'm going to see how many people I can actually impact.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's a couple of different answers there. But your dad sounds like a great guy, and we're standing on the shoulders of our parents, right? It's like I'm sure your dad sacrificed, and your family did to get you to where you are. You could take more risks and be more entrepreneurial, and so you're standing on that stability. So that's wonderful to hear. But so for me, it was like my dad passed away. That was one thing. My dad passed away. I was 23, or no, I was 20, almost 22. So that started sparking it within me, like, hey man, life is short. He was 53 when he passed away from cancer. So he had a battle with cancer. That was 11 months, terrible. And so I'm like, man, I have to do something bigger with my life and do it quickly. So that was one impetus, right? And then the second thing is, um, again, I was blessed by having this partnership kind of come to me, and these are people, you grow up with a lot of people, right? And like some people might approach you with a business idea and you're like, no, I'm good. I'm going to pass on that because, you know, maybe there's something about their work ethic or, their integrity sometimes, you're just like, I don't know if that person has the perseverance. But in this case, my two people who approached me, they're brothers, I grew up with them, they're top notch, absolutely they're not gonna fail because they won't let themselves fail. So they had that mindset. I'm like, you know what? Boom, I'm in. And the third thing is, which is kind of funny looking back, how I got wrapped into this mindset that I want to caution people about, because I see it as perpetual, it's evergreen in real estate. It's like, hey, just get into real estate today, and it always is up and to the right. It's almost like infomercial type of investment mindset. It's like, hey, get in now before you miss every opportunity ever. And so I had a little bit of that bug. And being young, um, now you become more tempered and more like dispassionate about becoming a real estate investor. It's not just let's just get into every single deal we see, right? That led for us a lot of to a lot of terrible situations that were really difficult to get out of. Now we did get out of them, but so you know what I'm saying? It was these factors, kind of those three factors I outlined. That's what led me to kind of just jump in.
I think it's important to understand, like most of us, and not us being everybody, right? Most people, we need reasons to take action, right? I've got one of my coaches. He likes to say, "Because of this, I took action." So when you think about your story, typically there's something that happens that triggers you into motion. Otherwise, if you're comfortable, you stay comfortable. And again,
Mhm.
go back to me. I was very comfortable at GM. I was picturing this 30-year runway of, being this beautiful, this great marketing executive
Yes,
and,
yeah,
having a great solid career and promotion after promotion. And maybe I become the CMO. Like, it was a great runway I had. But when we went into bankruptcy and I watched those senior leaders who had that plan get let go, who had no plan B, it forced me to say, oh, any day this could be me. And it could be me not just because the company's going into bankruptcy, it could be me
right,
because of politics, right? I'm not someone's guy, or I'm this guy's guy, but he didn't win the political struggle. He didn't get the big job. So now I'm seen as his guy and they're going to boot me out, right? I saw that
right,
happen. So that made me say I need to take more control of my life. In your story, it really comes down to, what I heard you say was, your father passing, at a young age, really gave you a sense of urgency as far as how much time we have on this planet. Your dad passing away in his 50s, you've been in your early 20s at that time. I'm sure you
yeah,
start to calculate to say, okay, if I'm going to do something big, I need to do it now. I can't wait until I get really comfortable and, when I'm in my 40s, start to say, okay, what kind of impact do I want to have? Like, no, you need to
right,
take action now. You didn't know exactly what you were going to do, but you got approached by these people you believed in. And that's so important as well because you have to have an opportunity. And we get approached by opportunities all day long, as you mentioned, right? You've got friends who
Mhm.
I'm sure have approached you and said, hey, man, I'm thinking about doing this. And you're like, I don't know about that, right?
Yeah,
And it may
yeah,
not be the idea, it may be something about the person, not in a negative way, but just you're taking all that in consideration. This was a
right,
partnership where you believed in individuals. The signs they had given you over the years was that they were hard workers, they were going to persevere, they were going to find a way to make this thing work. So you felt comfortable moving forward with them. It doesn't mean every deal went swimmingly and was perfect. It just means that you knew they would find a way to find success over the long run. And that last point you made, it's kind of that FOMO thing where,
mhm,
real estate tends to go up in value. We know that's true over the long haul, but it doesn't
right,
mean every single month, every single week, every single year, right? There are definitely ebbs and flows of it. But if you're going to invest for 30 or 40 years, yes, more than likely it's going to, I mean, history
of
shows
course,
us that
yeah,
the real estate will go up in value. The question is, are you planning on holding for 30 or 40 years, right? Or if you're trying to hold it for 2 or 3, then you might have some challenges. But I love that insight because it's very important for us to understand what our motivating factors are. And sometimes we're fighting something inside. If you're not ready to take action, maybe you're fighting something inside, or maybe there's a fear that you haven't really identified. And you have to sit down and really think through what you want to do, the legacy. And when I hear you talk about, uh, having a life in public service and being an elected official, it tells me that there was something important to you about serving the community. Can you just talk about that a little bit more? Because, I know it's not necessarily real estate related, but I'm very curious of where that comes from and why you felt this sense of service.
yeah. So that feels like ancient history to me right now at some levels, but I do. It's interesting to talk about sometimes for me because well, the first catalyst was September 11th, and I remember getting the news. Everyone's like getting the news, right? Click on the TV at that point. It's not as much internet and all this stuff. Like so, I click on the TV and it's like, wow, this is all happening right now, and I just felt a sense of like I didn't really understand the world. I was very much like self-focused, you know, like many 19-year-old kids are, whatever, whatever. And and I just wanted to, I felt like some of my friends went into the military and I felt like I wanted to pull myself out of that self-focus and kind of like start thinking about how do I get back? How do I become part of a good response? Um, and if everyone kind of does their little small part, I think that becomes powerful for a nation. So that's where my head was at. And it started growing inside of me and I started changing up. I was a history major. I started changing up some of my coursework to be more like political science and learning about like what's going on, take a course on terrorism that they had at my university, and then I did an internship with a congressman that was up there. So just seeing that public service actually gets a bad rap at times, but there are good people doing good things. And I was like, man, I'm gonna chase this down. And now also seeing my dad growing up, so my dad, again, he was a painter, he's a working class guy in New York City. And but he at night would always be involved in anything recreation oriented, so he would be like coaching all of our teams. But then even when I aged out, he was like still on the recreation commission as a voluntary thing, right? Like a board that serves the town and all this stuff. Being an umpire, being a referee, like the guy that's always around the recreation programs. He loved it. So I saw all this like community oriented mindset. He wasn't like he sat me down and was like, hey, you have to serve the community. I just saw it. So and then finding myself back in my hometown after he passed away, I didn't expect to be there. And it just so happened one of my friends said, hey, here's literally an ad in a newspaper. If you can believe this, a physical print ad. He's like, they're looking for candidates to run for office. Why don't you, I know you want to think about public service. Why don't you do this? And so it was completely random. I had no political aspirations, but that's one thing led to another. I called up the person's number and then they're like, yeah, come on in. And they literally put me up that very campaign season. They put me up as their candidate. So that's how it happened. I was 22.
Oh, wow. I love it. I love it. I appreciate that, man. I think it goes back to show just, there are parts of us that we don't know. Sometimes those seeds are planted for you. It sounds like your dad did a lot of work, right? Hardworking guy, but on the same note, always had time to serve the community, being in the rec centers and doing the rec leagues. And
Right.
that was something you saw, and that inspired you to want to serve your community as well. So I appreciate you sharing that story. Let's talk about that transition, right? Today, you're the managing director of ATX Acquisitions. w- what does ATX, focus on? What are your priorities, and what's kind of your vision as a leader for this organization?
Yeah. So the mid part of my story, just in like 10 seconds, is that between 2011 and 2019, the founder of this firm, his name is Pete Rex, my partner of 20 years, right? He founded a real estate private equity company that was vertically integrated that bought $2 billion in total asset value. I became very early joiner of that team, became a partner fairly quickly, and I saw that whole ride. So that was wonderful. I became CEO of that business in like 2016. So we grew a phenomenal, very well regarded business. But in 2019 we became net sellers. So we sold over 1.5 billion of the total portfolio in 2019 and 2020. We felt that the market had got extremely frothy. So we flipped on a dime, really. It was very unexpected. And I don't believe a lot of groups did that. They might have slowed down, but we really shut down our buy side, which is a whole episode in and of itself because a lot there. But we at that period, we decided to pivot our property management business that had only served our assets, our owned assets, and we became a third party provider. So, and that stopped it stopped actually acquiring deals. So ATX Acquisitions in 2023 was launched as a brand new firm, same founder, Pete Rex, many of the same team members or partners like myself. I've been with him 20 years. Our CFO has been with us for 11 years. But it was a brand new business because it was focused on a brand new buying opportunity. And then there's some of the old partners in our legacy business. They had gone on to do other things because they wanted to keep buying other deals. So I hope that explains it. But the ATX Acquisitions is formed because we see finally, after many years on the sidelines, we see a very compelling buying opportunity, and now is the time to get back in the market. And other people are fearful, and we're trying to get greedy. You know what I mean? The
Tell
Buffett
me,
mentality. So.
absolutely. Tell me what gets you and the ATX team excited or interested in the current market and the buying opportunity.
Well, I think there's a lot of historical, things that are or historic things that are happening. One is the Fed, the way that the Fed jacked up rates so fast, like a 20x increase in such a short period is historically that hasn't happened before. Like in the 80s, when they talk about that, that happened over a longer period, and it was only like a 5x increase in the rate. So the shock to the system is really leading to opportunities. And then you have a lot of people that bought during COVID, this exuberance I talked about earlier, this like FOMO investing, everything's going to go perfectly. It's not going to go perfectly when you have floating debt. You bought at an extremely high basis. Insurance rates have gone crazy in many of the states that we're focused on, like Florida and Texas. Labor costs have gone through the roof, and now supply and demand is a tailwind because there's a lot of supply. Now I think that's going to come back into balance. I heard Joe Ferris talk about this on your show, but so anyway, that's the buying opportunity we see. There's a lot of groups that they bought they bought wrong. Let's put it that way, and now they're forced to get out of that deal. And then we come in and we can buy deals below replacement cost and lock in really good basis, and then be long-term focused. That's where we're at.
You talked about a couple factors that certainly are impacting a number of investors, right? So going back to kind of the height of transactions over the last few years, we have floating rate debt, low interest rates. We had high basis costs for these properties since the interest rates are so low. You
Right.
have now higher insurance costs. You have supply, a lot of supply coming online. Again, insurance or interest rates are so low. We had a lot of development the last 2 years. We've seen the most development, I think, in the last 30 some years. But that's going
Right.
to drop off a cliff after these 2 years here. But as you talk about the opportunity today, all those things factored in means that current owners, some current owners, they're in trouble. They're going to be in a situation where they either need to sell or they have to sell, and that creates a buying opportunity. Can you just provide a little more context? Are you seeing an increase in either deal flow, in distressed assets, in foreclosures? Just talk to me more about just trying to put some more context to how these factors or equate to a greater buying opportunity for you and other investors.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. One thing is that transaction volume continues to be pretty paltry compared to where it was, right? And that's I think there's a couple things there. One is that the owners of assets, they're holding on for dear life. They're doing their best to try to not sell during this time when they know they can't get their pricing that they want. So some of them, their asset is not even worth the debt that they placed on it, right? So they're doing everything they can to maybe do a capital call, do pref equity, work it out with their banks to extend their loan or do whatever they can because of course they don't want to have a total loss of their equity and their LP equity. So the transaction volume is extremely low, but the buyer activity is also low. So that's why if you're doing deals right now with brokers love you because you're standing out and especially if you can close. So if you talk to a lot of brokers right now, tons of deals that have gone under contract the last 6 to 12 months have just blown out because people can't line up their equity. So everything's harder in a down environment, where I would say we're part of the down cycle right now. Like 2011, 12, 13, putting together deals is really, really hard because capital markets are frozen up. People are more fearful. No one knows what the future quite holds. So yeah, I think it's just people are just massively off balance. But that's why if you can get a deal done right now, if you have the courage to do it and you can go raise the equity, I think you're locking in wonderful basis. So let's talk about a deal that we have currently in best and final, right? This is a 2019 vintage Core Plus location in Dallas, very sizable deal, 300 unit plus, infill, highly desirable location, and we're in best and final on this. And one of the reasons why we love it is we look at intrinsic value, right? So we're looking at durability of cash flows, like, you know, what's that look like over the next 5 years? What will rent growth look like? How can we grow NOI? What kind of programs can we do? But we also look at intrinsic value based on discount to replacement cost. And I think that's a very important one because if we can lock in an ultra core location, a 2019 deal, and it's 25% or more below replacement cost, that feels very good. You know, that means to me it's like a wonderful time to buy. it's the flip side of 2020 and 21 when people were buying deals above replacement cost. Which anytime that happens, I think everyone needs to be a little bit fearful, because that means that pricing probably has become too exuberant.
Yeah, I want to play that back because what you're getting at here, and a term like replacement cost is one that I think people have probably heard maybe once or twice. But what you're really getting at is if you just had the land, what does it cost to build a brand new property? And
Right.
if you think about this logically and just take all the industry stuff off for a second, let's just say it costs you. I'm just going to use easy numbers: $200,000 a unit to build, right? Maybe it's more, 300, whatever it is, right? If it costs you $200,000 a unit to build, and you can buy it for 25% below that, now you're talking about if I can buy it for $150,000, then that's below the replacement cost. So there's intrinsic value there because
Right.
if somebody else wanted to build something or the competition, if you wanted new competition, they would have to spend another $50,000 a unit to compete with you because you're buying a newer asset, right? 2019 is talking about a 5-year-old asset. So this isn't true if you're buying 1960s or 70s products, but for newer stuff, your main competition is going to be other new stuff that exists or the new assets that could come online. So it makes sense to think about it that way. On the flip side, if you go back a few years, you mentioned that the replacement costs were actually lower than the purchase prices that people were using. So if you're buying an asset for, say, $220,000 a unit, but it only would cost you $200,000 a unit to build it, well, you're buying it at a premium, right? So maybe you're saying, okay, what exists, I don't have to wait the 18 months for it to come online. But the point is that someone else is likely to come out and say, well, I can build lower than that. I'm going to have a newer asset, better amenities. I can just do something newer. You're going to have more competition. And that's a great sign that, hey, maybe you're buying it at a peak number. So just really good insights
Yeah.
there to add a little context to the rationale when you talk about intrinsic value is understanding just like, hey, who am I really competing with here? Because if they can go out there and build something cheaper and newer, then that's going to be more appealing in the long run than what I'm buying now versus if I'm buying something that already exists. It's like if you think about cars, right? If you go buy the 2025 model of whatever vehicle, you would expect it to cost more than the 2020 version of that same vehicle, right? If that 2020 version is costing more than a 2025 version, that feels off, right? Most people will recognize
Right.
that right
Right.
away. But when we think
Yes.
about the apartment space, we don't necessarily, or many investors, I should say, may not necessarily kind of put that context on there. But I love the way you broke that down there. Hey, just when you think of the opportunities today, you talked about it's challenging for some buyers because they're having a hard time maybe getting the capital together for deals. So a lot of the deals are not actually closing. Give us a tip or two that we can leverage if we are buyers in today's market to make sure that we are closing more transactions.
In order to get LP, your investors interested in your deal and to build relationships on the LP side, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say, man, maybe I just listened to to your podcast with him. Joe Fairless has some really good stuff in Best Ever syndication book. But just a lot of mental models, right? It's like build a relationship. Don't just call people up when you need to fund a deal. Um, really get to know what people need and how you can serve them. Um, and then be there for them and try to add value to them. So I think these are really good mental models. They're very hard to do because most people are so busy building their business or managing their deals that they already own, and then they get a deal in hand and it's high pressure. It's like, oh, I got to reach out to everyone and I need money right away. So I think taking a long-term focus on relationships has been paying off for us at ATX and warming up our old relationships because we haven't shown them deals in a while, but we've done very well for them. So I think just being a little bit more patient and focus on like service orientation, like a service mindset, that's critical. It's like you have to be mission focused. Your mission is to serve people.
I love that. Great, great tips, great feedback, and definitely more evergreen approach because it
Mhm.
is all ultimately about the relationships and working with those clients and those investors. So I appreciate you sharing that. Hey, before we
Yeah.
go to a round of insights, I do want to ask another question on ResProp, right? So from a property management standpoint, again, you talked about some of the deals that are in trouble now, deals where they're doing capital calls, looking at pref equity. For those operators who are maybe in this bit of a crunch, is there an operations tip or a property management tip that you can share on maybe ways to increase value, increase cash flow on these properties without maybe, damaging the overall product?
Well, I think it would depend. Am I giving advice to a vertically integrated team or someone who's using a third party operator?
I
Like,
would imagine many of the listeners are using third party, so I think that would probably be
yeah.
most beneficial. So let's assume it's a third party management.
Well, a lot of things. It's a whole episode too, right, John? But, one thing for sure that I like to say is like the greatest illusion around communication is that it actually took place. That's one of my favorite quotes. Like, really think about that as an owner. You think you've really described your business plan that's in your head, your vision for the property, what needs to be executed, in what priority to your property management team. And oftentimes, I've seen that actually there's a very big gap between what an owner wants out of the asset and what they expect, and kind of how they're beginning with the end in mind, and then what the operation team thinks they're achieving for the owner. Does that make sense? So I think being a very active owner, well, there's many different types of ownership, right? But it has to start with a period up front where it's very active, where you as an owner are setting the whole the prioritization, the vision, the business plan. You're setting that with the property management team, and they've received that commander's intent. You know what I
What do you
mean?
what do you prefer as, as the lead of that third party management firm? Like, do you prefer like a written business plan, or what does that look like in your mind to make sure that everyone's on the same page?
I think a written business plan is always great. Yeah, we've done that in our business quite a bit. I kind of like the Bezos approach. Like, he used to start his meetings at Amazon with like 6-page memos, written memos, like single spaced. And there's something about distilling your thoughts into narrative form that I think does help. So if all you give me is a budget, right? Um, man, I could just be lost. I just get lost in the sauce. That's what we said. It's like, you get lost in the weekly pressure to do certain things, and then you focus maybe on the wrong things. Like, you're focused too much on occupancy. You should be focused on NOI. Oh, what about the CapEx program? We just lost 2 months because I didn't know the owner wanted to do a unit turn on every single turn. You know what I mean? So I think having a written business plan uh, is a wonderful way to really capture what's in your head and give it to the operator.
Dan, I appreciate that. Very valuable, very helpful. Something that, again, many folks may be overlooking, but make sure you're on the same page communication wise with the business plan, because there are nuances that they may not understand, especially when you're talking to an on site property manager who maybe doesn't have maybe the business acumen or the overall strategic chops that you as an operator have, you as a CEO, Dan. So making sure that everyone's clear on what the objectives are, what you're looking at as far as outcomes, that's going to help everybody stay on the same page. Hey, if you want to learn more about Dan and his company, you can check him out on LinkedIn. Obviously, he's got ATX Acquisitions as well as ResProp. So check him out there. We'll put a link to his LinkedIn page in our show notes. Right now, we're going to transition to our round of insights. Dan, give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
I think my failure out of public service, I ran for a higher office when I was 30 years old, and then as soon as I lost that position, I was able to focus on real estate full time, and that was the key, like almost like the pivot point in my whole life. And then I went full time into real estate, and even though the passive stuff became very full time at times, but it was like mind, body, soul, spirit into real estate, and that has done wonderful things for my life, my family, and I found a great mission here too. So
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
I think just it's very simple, it's almost dumb, but like calendar. I think the calendar is really important, and paying attention to it, not letting people just throw stuff on your calendar, but actually being in charge. There's a guy named Peter Drucker talks about this in a great book called Effective Executive. Is you know map out your time. Where's your time really going? So use your calendar wisely. It's the biggest thing.
Speaking of books, give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
I've recommended for a while now, the shareholder letters by Buffett. So like for 50 plus years of these shareholder letters, it's a lot to get through, but it's just amazing, like, wisdom, financial knowledge. He's open about his mistakes. He's humble. He gives credit to other people. It's wonderful. And you watch his businesses progress over time, Geico and See's Candies and all this other stuff. Is very interesting to read through.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
I would say prayer and fitness, both of those things. When I'm not doing it, I just feel off. I feel very, very, off balance. So just moving around, moving my body, and then being centered around, some kind of prayer daily.
Give me your number one insight for leading a large real estate business.
Hopefully get out of the way. Let your team shine, serve your team, and boost them up.
Good stuff there. You are in Austin, Texas. I know you and I spoke before we hit record. You're in New York and lived all over a little bit in a couple different cities, but let's focus on Austin. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Ooh, oh man. Well, it's got to be barbecue. So there's a place called Franklin's Barbecue. It's like legendary barbecue, and it's the kind of place where you stand online, for 2 hours, or you used to. I haven't done that in a while, but like they sell out when they sell out. It's just a crazy good brisket there. So it's amazing.
Franklin's, it is awesome, man. Well, Dan, you gave us some great insight, man. I really enjoyed talking to you and getting to know you a little bit more. Learn about your story, and what got you into this space. Really hearing about your dad and how important he was into the community and how his passing just really pushed you to say, you know what, I need to be more urgent with what I'm doing and take action. Can't wait. I also want to serve my community. How you start off passive, kind of transitioned into more of an active role, and through a partnership that you've had since, college days, you've built this business here along with your partner and have built thrive and opportunity for a lot of other people, $2 billion worth of acquisitions, 15,000 units, and really where you see the opportunities today and why you all have kind of gotten re-engaged with the acquisition side based on the opportunities that are presenting themselves. Lots of great tips and insights for our listeners. So I appreciate you sharing those insights from your perspective. Again, folks want to learn more, connect. We will put your LinkedIn page in our show notes. I look forward to staying in touch with you, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks for having me on, man. It was a great show. Appreciate it.